Have you ever looked at your bank account and thought, how on earth do people save $100,000? Maybe you've been working for years. Maybe you've cut back on eating out. Maybe you've canceled subscriptions. Maybe you've even picked up a side hustle. And yet somehow, every time you finally build up a few $1,000s, something happens. Your car breaks down. Your rent goes up. A medical bill shows up. An unexpected expense wipes out months of progress. And meanwhile, you see people online talking about six-figure investment portfolios like it's completely normal. If that sounds familiar, here's something that might surprise you. The hardest money you'll ever save isn't your first $100,000. It's often your first $25,000. And once you understand why, you'll completely change how you think about building wealth. My name is Neo, and I spend way too much time thinking about how people build wealth, save money, and create financial freedom. If you're someone who feels like you're working hard but struggling to make meaningful financial progress, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now here's the thing. Most people believe building wealth is simply about discipline. Work harder, spend less, invest more, repeat. But that explanation misses something incredibly important. Because if wealth building were purely about discipline, then saving your second $25,000 would be just as difficult as saving your first. But that's not what happens. In reality, many people spend years reaching $25,000. Then they reach $50,000 surprisingly quickly. Then $100,000 doesn't feel nearly as impossible. So what's going on? Let's talk about it. The first reason your first $25,000 feels impossible is because you're fighting against gravity. Financial gravity. Think about a rocket launching into space. NASA engineers will tell you that the majority of fuel is burned during takeoff, not once the rocket is already flying through space. The hardest part is escaping gravity. Money works the same way. When your net worth is zero, every dollar must come directly from your labor. You work. You get paid. You save. That's it. There are no investments helping you. There are no dividends. There are no meaningful capital gains. No compounding. No momentum. Nothing. Everything depends entirely on your ability to earn and save. Let's use an example. Imagine Sarah earns $60,000 per year. After taxes and expenses, she's able to save $500 monthly. That's $6,000 annually. At that rate, reaching $25,000 takes over 4 years. 4 years of consistency, 4 years without major setbacks, 4 years of saying no to things, 4 years of staying motivated. That's a long time. And this is where most people quit, because human beings are terrible at staying motivated when rewards feel distant. Psychologists call this present bias. We naturally value immediate rewards more than future rewards. In one famous study, participants frequently chose smaller rewards today over larger rewards later, even when waiting was mathematically better. And that's exactly what happens with money. Saving feels painful today. The reward feels abstract. Future you benefits. Current you sacrifices. That's not an easy trade. Here's what most people don't realize. The first $25,000 isn't just a financial challenge. It's a psychological challenge. You're building proof that you can actually do this, proof that your system works, proof that you're capable of long-term consistency, and that proof becomes incredibly powerful. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Neo, but money is money. Why would the next $75,000 be any easier? Great question, because something fascinating starts happening once you cross certain financial thresholds. Your money begins helping you make more money. Let's look at some real numbers. Suppose you reach $25,000 invested in a broad stock market index fund. Historically, the U.S. stock market has returned roughly 10% annually before inflation over long periods. Now, obviously, returns vary year to year. Some years are negative. Some years are fantastic. But let's use 10% for simplicity. At $25,000 invested, 10% growth equals $2,500 without doing anything. No overtime, no side hustle, no extra shifts, just growth. Now compare that to someone starting from zero. They have to earn that entire $2,500 themselves. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's say you continue investing $500 monthly. At the beginning, almost all progress comes from contributions, but over time, growth starts doing more of the heavy lifting. At $50,000 invested, 10% growth equals $5,000. At $75,000, 10% growth equals $7,500. At $100,000, 10% growth equals $10,000 every year. Now look at what's happening. At $100,000, your portfolio is generating more growth than many people save annually. The game starts changing. You stop pulling the entire wagon yourself. Your money starts pushing from behind. And that's why the next $75,000 often feels easier than the first $25,000. But there's another reason nobody talks about enough. Income tends to rise over time. When people imagine saving their first $25,000, they often assume their income remains fixed forever. But that's rarely reality. Most people's earning power increases throughout their careers. Maybe they switch jobs. Maybe they gain experience. Maybe they get promotions. Maybe they start a business. Maybe they develop valuable skills. According to labor market data, earnings generally increase significantly during the first half of a person's career. That means the version of you trying to save the first $25,000 is often the lowest earning version of yourself. Think about that. The hardest savings target usually happens when you're making the least money you'll earn for the next decade. No wonder it feels difficult. Imagine trying to climb a mountain carrying a backpack full of bricks. Halfway up, somebody starts removing bricks. The climb gets easier, not because the mountain changed, because your burden changed. Your financial journey works similarly. Now here's another surprising factor: lifestyle inflation. Usually people hear that phrase negatively, and honestly, it often is. People earn more money and immediately spend more money. Bigger apartment, new car, more expensive vacations, nicer restaurants. The problem is that every raise disappears. But here's the opportunity. If you can avoid increasing your lifestyle as quickly as your income increases, wealth starts accelerating. Let's imagine you get a $10,000 raise. After taxes, maybe that's around $7,000. Most people spend nearly all of it. But what if you invested $5,000 instead? That's a huge boost. Suddenly, you're making progress much faster than before. And that's exactly what many wealthy people do. They don't necessarily live like monks. They simply allow their income to grow faster than their spending. This creates an expanding gap, and that gap becomes wealth. Here's what most people don't realize. Wealth isn't built from huge sacrifices. It's built from maintaining small gaps between earning and spending over very long periods. Now let's talk about a mistake that makes the first $25,000 feel even harder. Comparing yourself to people who are already at $500,000 or $1 million. Look, social media has completely distorted people's understanding of wealth building. You'll see someone discussing a $1 million portfolio, someone else talking about retiring at 35, someone showing passive income, and suddenly your $8,000 savings account feels insignificant. But that's ridiculous, because you're comparing Chapter 2 to Chapter 20. The millionaire isn't competing against your starting point. They're benefiting from decades of compounding, decades of investing, decades of career growth, decades of financial mistakes and lessons. Nobody starts with momentum. Momentum is earned, and that's exactly why your first $25,000 matters so much. It's the point where momentum begins. Think about pushing a massive flywheel. At first, it's incredibly difficult. You push, nothing happens. You push again, still almost nothing. But eventually, it starts moving. Then each rotation becomes easier, then easier, then easier. The flywheel hasn't changed. Momentum has. That's how wealth works. Now let's address another objection. Some people will say, Neo, if compounding is so powerful, why doesn't everyone become wealthy? Because mathematics alone doesn't create wealth. Behavior does. The biggest obstacle isn't understanding compound interest. Most people understand it. The obstacle is staying invested long enough for compound interest to matter. Markets crash. People panic. They sell. The economy slows. People stop investing. Life gets expensive. People abandon the plan. That's why psychology is just as important as mathematics. In fact, I'd argue it's more important. Because the best investment strategy in the world is worthless if you can't stick with it. Here's a simple example. Investor A earns 8% annually for 30 years. Investor B earns 12% annually but constantly jumps in and out of investments. Who wins? Often Investor A, because consistency beats perfection every single time. So how do you actually reach that first $25,000 faster? Let me give you 3 practical steps. Step 1. Focus on increasing income before obsessing over cutting expenses. Look, budgeting matters, but there's a limit to how much you can cut. There's almost no limit to how much you can earn. Learning valuable skills, negotiating salary, starting a side business, freelancing, all of these can dramatically increase savings potential. Step 2. Automate everything. The less decision-making required, the better. Set automatic transfers. Set automatic investments. Remove willpower from the equation because willpower eventually fails. Systems don't. Step 3. Track net worth, not just savings. This sounds small, but it's powerful. Many people lose motivation because they only look at their bank account. Instead, track total net worth monthly. Watching that number grow creates momentum, and momentum creates consistency. Finally, I want you to remember something. The first $25,000 feels impossible because you're building the foundation, you're creating habits, you're learning discipline, you're developing financial confidence. You're proving to yourself that wealth building is possible. And honestly, that's the hardest part. Once momentum appears, things start changing. Not overnight, not magically, but noticeably. The next $75,000 often arrives faster because you're no longer starting from zero. You have skills, you have systems, you have experience, you have investments working for you, and most importantly, you have belief. Because you've already done something many people never accomplish. You proved you can save and invest consistently. And once you prove that, everything changes. If you're currently working toward your first $25,000, keep going. Seriously, you are probably much closer than you think. The frustrating part is that progress feels invisible right before momentum arrives, but that's exactly when consistency matters most. So don't focus on the $1,000,000 portfolio. Don't focus on somebody else's timeline. Focus on the next deposit, the next investment, the next month of consistency. Because one day, you'll look back and realize something surprising. The hardest money you ever saved wasn't your first $100,000. It was your first $25,000. And once you conquered that, everything else became possible. If this video helped you think differently about money, hit the subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments. How far are you from your first $25,000? I'd love to hear where you're at in your financial journey. And as always, thanks for watching.